You ever feel like you keep attracting emotionally unavailable people, like it's some kind of cosmic joke? You finally open up, invest your energy, and just when you start feeling a connection, poof, they pull away. Or worse, they stay, but only on their terms, keeping you at arm's length. Sound familiar? Well, it's not random. There's a reason this keeps happening, and it has everything to do with how introverts process emotions, energy, and relationships. See, most introverts think they just need to try harder or be more outgoing to make relationships work. But the real problem isn't effort, it's who they're giving that effort to. Emotionally unavailable people are drawn to introverts because they know they won't be pressured to open up. And introverts? They stick around because they mistake distance for mystery and inconsistency for complexity. The result? A frustrating cycle of emotional exhaustion, self-doubt, and chasing connections that were never solid to begin with. But here's the good news. Once you understand why this keeps happening, you can break the pattern. You don't have to settle for relationships that leave you drained. In this video, you'll learn exactly why introverts attract emotionally unavailable people, how to spot the red flags before you get too invested, and most importantly, how to shift your energy so you attract the kind of relationships that actually feel good. Let's get into it. Introversion and emotional availability. Introverts process emotions in a way that's almost like having a private journal inside their heads. They feel everything deeply, analyze every interaction, and yet they rarely put those emotions on display. This makes it incredibly easy to overlook signs of emotional unavailability in others. They assume everyone else processes feelings the same way, when in reality, some people simply avoid emotions altogether. It's like expecting someone to speak your language when they've never even learned the alphabet. And here's where it gets tricky. When something feels off in a relationship, an introvert's first instinct isn't to confront, but to retreat. Instead of asking, why does this person feel distant? They'll sit with their own thoughts, replay conversations, and try to rationalize the behavior. But avoidance doesn't fix anything. It just prolongs a dynamic that's already draining. Imagine someone ignoring red flags in a book they're reading, hoping the story gets better on its own. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. So how do you break this cycle? One strategy is externalizing thoughts. Instead of keeping everything bottled up, journaling or even talking to a trusted friend can offer a fresh perspective. Another trick? If you constantly feel like you're deciphering someone's emotions, take a step back and ask, am I trying to connect with them or just trying to solve a puzzle? Because relationships aren't supposed to be detective work. Overstimulation and avoidant attachment. Introverts thrive in calm, controlled environments, but relationships? They can be unpredictable, messy, and, let's be honest, draining. When overstimulated, an introvert's natural response is to withdraw, seeking solitude to recharge. But here's the problem. This need for space can sometimes mirror emotional unavailability. The difference? An introvert needs alone time to process and return more present, while an avoidant partner uses distance to keep emotions at arm's length. It's like one person stepping back to breathe, while the other is silently closing the door. This dynamic can create a dangerous cycle. Introverts often attract avoidant partners without realizing it. Why? Because they don't demand constant attention, and avoidants love that. An introvert might think, finally, someone who understands my need for space, while the avoidant is just relieved they don't have to engage emotionally. Over time, though, the introvert starts craving real connection, while the avoidant keeps pulling away. And suddenly what seemed like compatibility starts feeling like rejection. So how do you spot this before you get caught in the loop? Pay attention to how space is used in the relationship. Are breaks from communication making things better or just widening the gap? A simple test. When you reconnect, does the person seem more engaged? Or do they seem relieved that they didn't have to talk for a while? If it's the latter, you might not be dealing with a fellow introvert. You might be dealing with someone who just isn't emotionally available. And that ties directly into the next issue, the energy drain that comes with these imbalanced relationships. Energy exchange and social fatigue. Introverts aren't just quiet observers. They're deep processors. Every interaction gets absorbed, analyzed, and stored like a mental archive. And that's great, until they end up in relationships that drain more energy than they give back. Because introverts listen so well and feel so deeply, they often attract people who take more than they give. Ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you just ran a marathon, but the other person seems more energized? That's a red flag. This kind of energy imbalance reinforces emotional detachment. When someone constantly takes without reciprocating, the introvert starts shutting down, not out of malice, but out of survival. They become more reserved, less open, and suddenly, conversations that once felt effortless now feel like work. It's not that introverts don't want to connect. It's that they're tired of one-sided connections. Imagine trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. At some point, you stop pouring. So, what's the fix? Boundaries. Small shifts, like limiting time with energy-draining people or making sure conversations are mutual, not just one-sided venting sessions, make a huge difference. If you find yourself always playing the therapist in your relationships, start asking, does this person ever check in on me? If the answer is no, it's time to redirect your energy. Because the goal isn't just to preserve energy, it's to create a space where it can actually grow. And speaking of safe spaces, let's get into why they're so crucial for emotional growth. Safe spaces and emotional growth. Opening up isn't about not wanting to share. It's about needing the right environment to feel safe enough to do so. Emotional growth doesn't happen in spaces where they feel rushed, judged, or dismissed. It happens where they can express themselves freely, without the fear of being misunderstood. That's why introverts thrive in relationships that feel like a sanctuary, not a battlefield. If a conversation feels like walking through a minefield, where one wrong step leads to conflict or shutdown, that's a sign the space isn't safe for growth. The key to building this emotional security? Boundaries. Not walls, boundaries. A wall shuts everyone out, but a boundary filters who gets access to your emotional energy. It's saying, I need time to process before responding, instead of feeling forced to react instantly. It's choosing to invest in people who make space for your voice, rather than those who dominate the conversation. A great way to test this? Share something personal but low stakes, maybe a small fear, an old memory, or a favorite book. If the other person dismisses it or turns the conversation back to themselves, that's a clue they may not be emotionally safe. But here's the mistake many introverts make. They adapt instead of asserting. They shrink to fit relationships rather than shaping relationships that fit them. This is why so many find themselves in connections that feel one-sided, because they assume they have to compromise everything to keep the peace. But peace shouldn't come at the cost of self-expression. And when it does, it's time to rethink how communication is happening in the relationship. Communication differences. Introverts are natural, deep thinkers. They don't just talk for the sake of talking. They choose their words carefully, processing emotions internally before expressing them. But here's where things get tricky. Emotionally unavailable people often avoid deep conversations altogether. This creates a frustrating imbalance. While the introvert is carefully crafting a meaningful response, the other person is dodging emotional depth like it's a game of tag. Ever felt like you're trying to have a real conversation, but the other person keeps slipping through your fingers? That's a sign you're dealing with someone who isn't willing to engage at the same level. The biggest mistake introverts make? Overanalyzing instead of observing. Instead of thinking, did I say something wrong? Shift the focus to, how does this person respond to emotional depth? Do they change the subject when things get serious? Do they deflect with humor or vagueness? Recognizing these red flags early can save you from investing in someone who isn't willing to meet you halfway. A great strategy? Ask open-ended questions that require more than a surface-level response, like, what's something that shaped the way you see relationships? If they dodge the question or give a generic answer, that's a clue. But here's the good news. Introverts have a secret advantage. Because they value quality over quantity in conversations, they're naturally skilled at identifying who's truly emotionally available. The key is trusting what they see instead of rationalizing red flags away. And once they do that, everything changes. Because when they stop chasing emotionally unavailable people, they start attracting the kind of connections that actually feel fulfilling. So, let's be real. How many times have you ignored the signs thinking, maybe if I just give them more time, they'll open up? Or convinced yourself that their emotional distance was just how they are, rather than a clear sign they weren't capable of giving you what you needed? Yeah, we've all been there. But now that you know the truth, what are you gonna do with it? The question is, are you ready to make that shift? If this hit home for you, don't just sit on this knowledge, start applying it. And if you want to keep learning how to navigate relationships as an introvert, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stick around. Because once you start valuing yourself the way you deserve, the right people will too.